So I don't think I'm going to break any brains out there tonight if I say that records or statistics are of existential significance for competitive athletes. So they're the way that we measure greatness in sports. They're the way that we measure failure in sports. They're the way that an athlete situates him, her, themselves on the spectrum between greatness and failure. And more fundamentally, they're a way to declare, I am here, I am a part of this world. So from the ages of 8 to 16, statistics, records meant much more to me than my English homework. I knew much more readily obscure statistics about the Chicago Bears than I did the periodic table. And to give you just one example of a set of statistics that I was obsessed about, there was a linebacker named Dick Butkus, the gloriously named Dick Butkus, who is often considered one of, if not the greatest linebackers to ever play. And if you were to have run into me between the ages of 8 and 16 and said, hey, quick, give me a statistic about Dick Butkus, I would say, well, I'm so glad you asked. For the 4 years that he played for the University of Illinois, he recorded 374 tackles. And for people out there who don't know football, that's a lot of tackles. So I ended my football career 20 years ago, and in these intervening 2 decades, all of these numbers that used to fill my brain and used to kind of constitute like the most interesting part of me have kind of fallen out of my brain. And so when it came time to think about what I could say tonight and how I could relate records to my football career and the concept of being off the record to my football career, I literally had to look myself up to remember what had happened. And so if you go to the ESPN site, you will find a record for Corey Sobel. And that record has 1 tackle. So Dick Butkus, 374. Corey Sobel, 1. So from an athlete's perspective, that's a nightmare. And my younger self is feeling a dark shadow pass over his spirit right now. But from a writer's perspective, that 1 up there is a dream. And I thought I would tell you a little bit about that number tonight. So to give you an idea of how much football used to mean to me, I was in 4th grade and we had an assignment. I'd been playing football for 1 year at this point. And so the assignment was to write a letter to yourself that was addressed to yourself 10 years in the future. And you were supposed to tell yourself where you thought you would be, who you thought you would be, what you'd be doing professionally or in college 10 years on. And so I wrote my letter. Everyone else in my class wrote their letters. They all got gathered and put into a plastic receptacle. That receptacle got buried in the yard of Nixon Elementary School in Sudbury, Massachusetts. 10 years passed, and then that time capsule was excavated and everyone read their letters. And I'm willing to guess that out of everyone's letter that day, mine was the most accurate. Because I had written to myself, Corey, when you are holding this note, you will be on a full Division I college football scholarship. And that's precisely what I was. And to give you an idea of how uncanny this is, out of 1 million high school players every year, 1% gets a scholarship to the Football Bowl subdivision team. So that's the highest of the high in Division I. And so there was some combination of sort of the same dreaminess that leads a 9-year-old to say, I want to be an astronaut or a deep sea diver or an explorer. But there was also the sheer bloody determination that was already in me that was going to combine with that dreaminess and result in me realizing my goal. But what my 9-year-old self couldn't tell his 19-year-old self is that when he was holding that note, he would be profoundly unhappy about how right he had been. And that's because football, after a childhood of giving me an identity that I could very readily, both senses, wear, as my family moved from town to town and state to state and we tried to find stability, this game that gave me a sense of purpose and purchase in a masculine world that was not going to give 2 shits about me otherwise. This game that was the alpha and omega for me had not only ceased to matter for me by the time that I got to high school, but I started to hate it. I'd seen around the sport by the time I was 16. I'd come to understand how empty the violence was. I'd come to see how corrupt and corrupting the game was. And most importantly, I'd come to see how anti-intellectual the football world was. And this was really important because as I was falling out of love with football, I was falling in love with literature, and I wanted to become a novelist. Now, this epiphany that I had couldn't have come at a worse time, because just when I'm ready to leave football behind, I need football more than ever. And that's because I wasn't a great student up to my junior year of high school, and so grades weren't going to help me get in anywhere. My family needed me to get a scholarship. There were 4 other kids in my family. And so, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I thought, I'm going to find a way to have my cake and eat it too. And so I thought really hard about it, and I said, okay, out of all the programs that are recruiting me, I'm going to take a scholarship from a place that has great academics and has a shitty football team. So I'm going to find a place where I'm going to be good enough that I can essentially coast along in football. I'll do my time. I'll start transitioning into being the intellectual I want to be. And most importantly, by being on a really bad team, you're not going to go to the playoffs. You're not going to play in the national championship or a bowl game. And so the season's going to be really circumscribed, right? So if you go to a really good team, your season gets extended by 2 months, sometimes more. So as it happens, I was getting recruited by Duke University. Duke, great academics, and more crucially, had what was probably the worst Division I college football team in the country at that point. So in the 3 years that preceded my matriculation at Duke, they won 2 of 34 games. 2 of those seasons, they hadn't won a single game. Let's go to Durham. So I get to North Carolina, and nothing goes to plan, of course. And my biggest mistake was that I hadn't thought about how the worse the team is, the more eager the coaches are going to be just to throw bodies on the field. And so essentially, as soon as I stepped foot on campus, I was expected to compete for a starting position or a second string position, and I was brought there to play. I wasn't ready to do this. I had to get my feet under me academically. I had to adjust to, life at Duke. And so I had to essentially kind of, so to speak, slow play the coaches. I didn't do as well during practices as I should have. And I also started sort of like greasing the wheels by saying, hey, if you give me a red shirt, and for people who don't know what a red shirt is, it's when you sit out your first year, you just stay on the practice squad and you retain a year of eligibility. If you redshirt me this year, I'm going to get bigger and stronger and faster, and I'll be even more useful to you next year. So this worked, but it didn't exactly endear me to these men who want to see, absolute commitment from all of their players. And I went on to get in more trouble that year than I had in the preceding 9 years that I had played football. And so I would not play very well as a tackling dummy, and I got in trouble. My teammates would get in fights with one another, and I got in trouble because I didn't get in the fights and didn't show how committed I was to this passionate sort of endeavor that we were all embarked upon. I wasn't eating the calories that I needed to during our mandatory meals, so I wasn't gaining the weight that I was expected to, and I got in trouble. I wasn't lifting and running as hard as I needed to, and I got in trouble. I would skip practice sometimes, and the punishment for that was you woke up the next morning at 5 a.m. and you ran up and down every single step of the stadium that we had, which fit 40,000 people. My favorite example of getting in trouble my freshman year was that it was spring, and I woke up just with this need to understand the poetry of John Keats. And so we had practice that day. We have practice, and we go in and we have film afterward. And so I brought my backpack with me. The lights go down, the film starts playing, the coach starts critiquing our performance, and I take out this little green modern library edition of John Keats, and I start reading it. Coach takes, maybe 30 seconds to see what I'm doing. The film stopped, the lights go up. Sobel, what the fuck is going on? I get in my usual raft of trouble, and in addition, I am no longer allowed to bring my backpack into certain parts of the football building. So while this is happening, I'm also just dead set on wringing every ounce that I can out of this education that I'm getting access to through the back door. So I'm not only taking 4 classes, I'm taking 5 classes. And these are the most advanced classes I can manage to talk myself into. And when you have that commitment and that amount of time you're spending on that, and then when you have your football commitment, which during the season can run 80 to 100 hours a week, I was getting maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, maybe 1 hour. I was physically, spiritually, and emotionally exhausted. And this was about the time when I was walking around campus just fantasizing about groups of faceless men jumping me and beating the shit out of me. That was the way that I relaxed, was thinking about this. So sophomore year comes, and now the pressure is really on. My redshirt year is over. I am expected to play. I am expected to contribute to the team. The only choice I have now is to play really badly during practice. And I'm able to stave off the coaches for a couple of weeks by doing this, but this really doesn't endear me to these people. And the same coach who got really, who wasn't a fan of John Keats and who had been bullying me and, humiliating me over the past year, finally has it one day. And during a meeting that we have in front of the other players, he not only bullies me again, he not only intimidates me, but he sexually harasses me. And so this really isn't helping the, fantasies of men coming to beat the shit out of me. And I also start wondering what it might feel like if I fell off the top of the chapel in the middle of campus. So while that's happening, I have another coach who's been watching me with a little more finesse, and he understands what I'm doing. And he has a stroke of genius. He says, well, we've been asking Sobel to perform well in practice so that he can get on the game field, but why don't we just put him on the game field and force him to perform? And so I was placed onto a couple of special teams. I was leapfrogged over players who've been playing harder and better than I did, and I started to play in games. And why this was such a masterstroke is that I was put on kickoff and kickoff return team. And for you non-football people out there, kickoff, you line up on one end of the field, the kicker kicks the ball down the field, you run 60 or 70 yards to try to tackle the ball carrier. But in between the ball carrier and you are a bunch of blockers who just want to hurt you and stop you from getting to the ball carrier. If you're on kick return, you're one of those people. And while I just cast them as being, these bloodthirsty hooligans, you're actually scared shitless because someone has a 60 or 70 yard head start on you. And so what you do is you just throw your body in front of theirs and hopefully slow them down for long enough so that they can't get to the ball carrier. So these are two positions where if you're on the field, you can't fake things or you might literally lose your head. And so in spite of myself, I start playing well. The talent that I've been trying to strangle and bury and just put to the side forever starts to come out of me. And this is what brings us to that lonesome tackle up there. So it's October. It's about the middle of the season. We're at home. We're playing the Citadel. It's a gorgeous, sunny, southern fall day. I'm on kickoff. I line up with the other 10 players. I crouch down into my stance. The kicker raises his hand. The whistle's blown. The ball is kicked down the field, and I go running. And I weave between blockers. And I run over another blocker. And I get to the ball carrier, and I wrap him up, and I bring him down, and I have made the tackle. So the number of people in our stadium were roughly the number of people in this room. So that's a decent approximation of how it felt. It wasn't this roar of applause. It was this sort of ambient smattering of sound that rattled around my helmet. So I get up off the ground and I run over to the sideline and I've got my hand on my hips and I'm trying to get my breath back and I'm trying to have my heart rate slow down. And I realize very profoundly that if I keep trying to negotiate these two lives, I'm not going to survive college, literally. And so another couple of weeks go by, things get worse between me and the coach. My psychological state is not the halest that it's ever been. And it comes out that I come forward about the harassment that's happened. And I get a deal. And the deal is, on the record, you will stay on the roster of the Duke University Blue Devils. But off the record, you can leave the football building and never return. And so the agreement was that I was going to do some nominal work. I was going to be like a sinecure for the athletic department. And so I worked as a secretary for an hour a week. I'd be, filling an Excel sheet or, wrestling with a filing cabinet or something like that. And I was free. And this is the part, we're at the end of my talk, and this is the part where I say, I put aside the childish fixation on numbers and statistics, and I'd sort of swam out into ambiguity, right? Into that rich sort of uncertainty of the artistic life. And I started writing short stories, and I started writing novels, and eventually one of those novels was published, and it's called The Red Shirt, and it's based on my experience as a college football player. And that's all true, and I'm proud of it, but a competitive athlete once is always going to be a competitive athlete. And so there are times when I need a shot of something a little nastier and purer. But even here, I can comfort myself because Dick Butkus has 0 novels published.